I've heard it said that some places are cursed, not because of what happens there, but because of what wasn't allowed to rest. If you live in a small town long enough, you know the stories. The abandoned barns, the crooked houses, the back roads where headlights disappear. But none of them compared to Hollow Creek High School. When I was a kid, they called it a miracle of progress. The town had scraped together state money and grants to build something new, something modern. For decades, we'd been sending kids to a squat, gray building that smelled of chalk and mildew. Then, in the fall of my freshman year, the new campus opened. Glass windows stretching 2 stories high, a gymnasium big enough for a college team, and lockers so shiny you could see your reflection in them. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was the biggest event our town had seen in years. The mayor gave a speech about investing in our children's future, while the marching band stumbled through a brass-heavy version of God Bless America. People clapped, kids ran into the building, teachers smiled through tears. But behind the cheering, I noticed something else. Some of the older folks, the ones who had lived here their whole lives, didn't clap. They stood with folded arms, faces set in stone. My grandmother was one of them. When I asked her why, she muttered, "They built it on the old ground." I didn't know what she meant. That first week, the school smelled like fresh paint and disinfectant. Everything gleamed. Polished floors, bright bulletin boards, chrome drinking fountains. But there was a heaviness in the air that didn't make sense. It was September, the last of summer heat still clinging to the air. But I remember shivering in the hallways. By the 3rd day, kids were already whispering. Someone said the lights in the 2nd floor hallway flickered even when maintenance checked the wiring. Another swore they heard crying in the girls' bathroom by the gym. Tyler, my best friend, swore a door slammed behind him while he was alone in the music room. Me? I didn't want to believe it. I told myself it was just new building jitters, the way big places sometimes feel strange until you get used to them. But then came the night that changed everything. It happened after football practice. I was late grabbing my backpack, so the rest of the team had already left. The sun had dipped low, shadows stretching long across the field. Inside, the hallways were empty, my sneakers squeaking with every step. I remember the silence most of all. Schools are never really quiet. There's always some hum of machinery, the faint chatter of voices, the scrape of a chair on tile. But that night, it felt like the whole building was holding its breath. Halfway down the main hallway, I stopped. Another set of footsteps echoed behind me, slow, deliberate. I turned around, expecting to see Tyler playing a prank, but the hallway stretched empty, lockers lining the walls like soldiers standing at attention. My pulse quickened. "Hello?" My voice sounded too loud. No answer. I started walking again, and again, the footsteps followed, half a beat behind, perfectly matching my pace. Panic clawed at me. I spun around. At the far end of the corridor, by the trophy case, a figure stood. Tall, motionless. He wore a black suit that looked decades out of place, the sleeves streaked with dirt. His face was shadowed, but I knew he was staring at me. I blinked, and he was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I told myself it was exhaustion, maybe my imagination after running drills. But deep down, I knew something had happened, something real. The next morning, I asked my grandmother what she meant about the old ground. She poured her coffee slowly, eyes fixed on the dark liquid swirling in the mug. "They built that school on a graveyard," she said finally. I laughed nervously. "Like an Indian burial ground? You mean like in the movies?" She shook her head. "Not Indian. Ours. This town had a cemetery long before you were born. They said they moved it years ago, but not everything gets moved. Some things stay where they're planted, and some things don't like to be disturbed." Her words settled heavy in my chest. At school that day, I looked around differently. The shiny lockers, the spotless floors, they all felt like a mask. A thin layer hiding something rotten underneath. I didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath our feet was waiting, and it was angry. If you ask anyone who went to Hollow Creek High in those years, they'll tell you the same thing. The hallways felt different after dark. During the day, with kids rushing between classes, lockers slamming, and teachers barking orders, it almost felt normal. But once the sun dipped low and the last buses pulled away, something changed. The silence inside those walls was never just silence. It was listening. By October, the whispers had spread beyond harmless rumors. A freshman swore she'd seen a woman's face staring back at her from the library window, even though she was the only one inside. Another kid claimed the bathroom stall doors rattled on their own. No one wanted detention anymore, not because of the teachers, but because it meant staying after hours. I told myself it was all in our heads. Stress, group hysteria, kids scaring each other on purpose. But deep down, I remembered that figure in the suit, the way it stood by the trophy case, waiting. I remembered the footsteps in the empty hall. And then came Tyler's dare. It was a Thursday evening. We'd both stayed late for study hall, and the sky outside had turned the color of ash, clouds gathering heavy. Tyler, always the one pushing boundaries, smirked as we packed up. "Bet you won't walk the whole science wing with the lights off," he said. I snorted. "Why the science wing?" "Because everyone says it's the most haunted. Teacher swore he heard desks moving on their own last week. You do it, I'll give you $20. I wanted to laugh it off, but pride is a stupid thing at 15. So I agreed. The janitor had already cut most of the lights. The long stretch of hallway was dark except for a faint glow spilling from exit signs. My sneakers squeaked on the linoleum, echoing far louder than I expected. I counted my steps. 10, 15, 20. The shadows stretched long against the lockers, warping into shapes that didn't look like mine. Halfway down, the air shifted. You know that feeling when you open a freezer and the cold rushes out? That's what it felt like. But all around me, swallowing the warmth from my skin. Then I heard it, the dragging sound, like something heavy scraping across tile. My heart lurched. I whipped around, phone light trembling in my hand. Empty hallway. But the sound came again, closer this time. "Tyler?" I whispered. But his laugh echoed faintly from the other end, too far away. The dragging turned into footsteps, slow, heavy. I froze. My mouth went dry. And then, a voice, low, breathy, right by my ear. "Leave!" I bolted, sprinting down the hall, chest burning, sneakers pounding. When I burst into the light at the far end, Tyler's grin collapsed into shock. "Dude," he whispered, eyes wide. "You weren't alone. I saw someone, right behind you, tall, in a black suit. That night, I couldn't get the sound out of my head. The dragging footsteps, the voice. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak of the house. At 2 a.m., I swore I heard 3 knocks at my window. The next day, Tyler wouldn't talk about it. He brushed me off, pretending he'd been joking, but I could see it in his eyes, the same fear curling in my stomach. We weren't the only ones. Rumors spread faster. A sophomore said she saw a man standing at the end of the cafeteria after hours, staring until the lights blinked out. A teacher resigned suddenly, refusing to explain why. The principal called for calm in an assembly, insisting the stories were distractions from education. But even as he spoke, I noticed his hand trembling at the podium. The real breaking point came 2 weeks later. I'd forgotten my history book in my locker and stayed after practice to grab it. The school was mostly empty, just the faint buzz of a vacuum somewhere down the hall. The stairwell echoed with each step as I climbed to the 2nd floor. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow. A tall figure at the far end of the hallway, barely visible in the dim light. But as I stared, the shadow moved. It stepped forward, slow, deliberate, and then it stopped. The air grew thick, heavy in my lungs. I felt pinned in place, like the hallway itself was holding me. The figure raised its hand. For a moment, I thought it was waving. But no, it was pointing, straight at me. I stumbled backward, fumbling with the stair rail, heart hammering. My vision blurred, black spots dancing. And then, the lights flickered, once, twice, and it was gone. I ran home that night, book forgotten, lungs burning with every step. At dinner, my grandmother watched me push food around my plate. "You saw him, didn't you?" she asked softly. My fork clattered. "Saw who?" Her eyes were sad, tired. "The undertaker. He doesn't belong to your world anymore, but he still walks it. And once he points at you, he doesn't forget." I wanted to scream at her to stop, to tell her I didn't believe in any of it. But the words stuck in my throat, because deep down, I already knew she was right. The hallways were no longer just hallways. They were corridors of shadows, filled with eyes I couldn't see. Every creak, every flicker of light, every breath of cold air told me the same truth. Hollow Creek High wasn't built for the living. It was built on the restless dead, and they wanted us gone. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. It starts as a whisper in the back of your mind, easy to ignore at first. But the more you try to push it away, the louder it gets, until it's not a whisper anymore, but a demand. After what I'd seen, the figure pointing at me, the voice in the hallway, I couldn't ignore it. I needed to know why. Why was our school so wrong? The town library wasn't exactly a place teenagers liked to hang out. The building itself looked older than time, with crooked shelves, a musty smell, and a librarian who acted like a prison warden. But if there were answers, they'd be there. I spent hours digging through old newspapers, records, anything I could get my hands on. Most of it was boring. Reports of town fairs, obituaries, weather updates from 50 years ago. But then I found it. A brittle clipping, edges yellowed and fragile, dated July 1954. The headline read, "Town relocates cemetery to make way for progress." My stomach sank. The article explained that the old Hollow Creek Cemetery had been moved to build a shopping plaza that never actually got built. It mentioned careful relocation of graves overseen by town officials. But the language was vague, almost rushed. Something about it felt wrong. That night, I asked my grandmother. We sat at her kitchen table, the yellow light above us flickering faintly. She didn't speak for a long time, just stared at her mug. Finally, she said, "They didn't move them all." Her voice was so soft I almost didn't hear. It wasn't enough. I needed more. So I asked around. At first, people brushed me off. No one likes to dig up the past in a small town. But eventually, someone told me about Mr. Hargrove, an old man who'd worked for the city decades ago. I found him at the diner, sitting in his usual booth, a cup of black coffee clutched like it was keeping him alive. His skin looked like worn leather, eyes pale but sharp. "You're curious about the school?" he rasped when I asked. I nodded. He leaned in. "I helped with the relocation back in '54, only it wasn't much of a relocation." "What do you mean?" "They paid us pennies to dig up graves, told us to do it quick. The coffins were falling apart, bodies turning to dust. Some markers didn't even have names. We took what we could see. The rest stayed in the earth." A chill crawled up my spine. "You think the ground forgets?" he asked, voice bitter. "You think the dead rest easy when you rip them from where they were laid? We left bones, we left teeth, we left souls with nowhere to go. And now you kids walk right over them every damn day." I wanted to believe he was just a bitter old man, spinning tales to scare me. But I couldn't shake the way his hands trembled, the way his eyes burned with memory. I told Tyler what I'd found. At first he laughed, but when I showed him the newspaper clipping, the smile faded. "Dude," he whispered, "if that's true, we're literally studying on top of a graveyard." We both sat in silence, the weight of it sinking in. After that, we started noticing more. The way the janitors avoided certain hallways, the way teachers flinched at sudden noises. Even the principal, who always preached calm, kept glancing at the floor whenever the subject of the building's history came up. It was like everyone knew. Everyone except us kids. One afternoon, Tyler and I wandered behind the school where the grass grew tall, uncut. We were supposed to be heading to practice, but something pulled us there instead. That's when we saw them. Half buried in the dirt, crooked and weather-worn, were stones. Not many, just a handful, scattered like broken teeth. The inscriptions were nearly gone, letters eaten by time. But one was still clear enough to read. Sarah Whitmore, beloved daughter, 1879 to 1894. We froze. It wasn't just a rumor. It wasn't just old man stories. The cemetery was still here. Tyler's face went pale. "Man, we shouldn't be here." But I couldn't move. I stared at that name, that date, and felt something cold settle into my bones. A life once lived, a body once buried, still here under our feet, and maybe, just maybe, still watching. That night, I had the dream for the first time. I was in the hallway again, but it wasn't bright and clean. The walls peeled, the lockers rusted, the floor warped like rotting wood. At the far end, the man in the suit stood waiting. Beside him, rows of figures emerged from the shadows. Pale faces, hollow eyes, dozens of them, all pointing at me. The whisper rose, not one voice but many, layered on top of each other until it was unbearable. "Give us back our rest." I woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing so fast I thought it would burst. And when I sat up, gasping, I swore I saw something at the corner of my room. A shadow, standing perfectly still, watching. The next morning, I told myself it was just a nightmare. But deep down, I knew the truth. The school wasn't haunted because it was new. It was haunted because it was old. Because beneath the brick and tile and polished floors, the dead had never left. October came early that year. Or maybe it just felt that way. because every afternoon, the wind whipped through the cottonwoods behind the football field and stripped the leaves before they had a chance to turn. By the time our class started hanging paper bats from the gym rafters for the fall festival, the trees looked like hands clutching at a gray sky. There were supposed to be a dozen of us on the decorating crew, but a flu bug, or fear, depending on who you asked, thinned the ranks. By dusk, it was down to 4. Me, Tyler, Mia from yearbook, and Jace, a kid who worked the soundboard in theater and always smelled faintly of pine cleaner. Ms. Alvarez, our English teacher and unofficial festival captain, kept checking her watch like she was counting the minutes till she could leave. 2 more boxes of lanterns, she said, pointing to a stack near the double doors. We hang them down the hallway from the gym to the cafeteria. Keep them low enough that parents notice, and high enough that nobody can yank them down, and no ladders without a spotter. Yes, ma'am, we said, almost in unison. The lights in the gym hummed overhead, and from outside, I could hear the distant buzz of the highway beyond the creek. For a while, it almost felt normal. Mia tying twine with quick, confident hands. Jace testing an extension cord with a click and a nod. Tyler leaping to touch the bottom of the backboard and grinning when he missed by an inch. Every time the doors opened, cool air slid across the floor and licked at our ankles. "You hear about the janitor?" Jace asked, plugging in a string of orange bulbs. "Keegan?" Tyler said. "He quit." "Number?" "He's just not here," Jace said. "Didn't clock out last night. Custodial office is locked. I heard the principal on the phone this morning, real tense." Mia shot him a look. "Maybe don't do the rumor thing right now." Jace shrugged, hands up. "Just saying what I heard." Ms. Alvarez clapped once. Lanterns, hallway. Go we ferried boxes into the corridor. The gym doors swung shut behind us with a thud that felt heavier than it should have. The hallway beyond was long and gleaming, the newly waxed floor reflecting the ceiling fixtures in a broken ribbon of white. A janitor's cart sat abandoned near the trophy case, mop at attention, a rag dangling like a dead bird. "Keegan's," Jace whispered. "Drop it," Mia said, her voice thin. We started hanging the lanterns, orange and black paper ribs that unfurled like cautious flowers. By the time we reached the middle of the corridor, a low rumble rolled across the ceiling. Thunder, somewhere far off. The emergency exit sign over the stairwell flickered twice and steadied. "Storm's moving in," Tyler said. "Love it. Adds to the ambiance." Ambiance is French for "this is how dumb people die," Mia muttered, but she was smiling. We finished the first string. Jace plugged it into the strip he'd taped to the wall, and a warm line of orange dots sprang to life. For a heartbeat, I forgot about everything else. The undertaker, the grave markers, Mr. Hargrove's trembling hands. The hallway looked festive, even friendly. The lights went out, not just the lanterns, the overhead fixtures too. The hum cut, and the building exhaled into a silence so complete it rang in my ears. In the space of a second, the corridor sank from October cozy to midnight cold. "Breaker?" Tyler said into the dark. "Stay put," Ms. Alvarez called from the gym. "Phone's out. I'll check the panel." A rectangle of pale gray appeared at the far end of the hall as the emergency exit sign found its backup power. It was just enough to turn the corridor into a tunnel of faint light and long breathing shadow. Something clinked against tile behind us, not the clatter of something dropped, more like the careful set down of a metal tray. Jace swallowed. Please tell me that's you." "Nope," Tyler said. I felt him step closer. A voice crawled out of the dark, not the whisper from the science wing, not the overlapping chorus from my dreams. Just 3 syllables, breath soft and wrong. "Go home." My skin prickled so fast I thought it might tear. Mia's hand found my sleeve and gripped hard enough to hurt. "Ms. Alvarez?" I called. "You hear that?" Her answer floated back, too bright. "Main breaker's tripped. I'll try the generator." The emergency sign flickered again. For a split second, the light seemed to stretch, bending down the corridor like glass on the verge of cracking. Then it steadied. Somewhere deep in the building, a machine coughed to life, stumbled and caught. The overheads warmed to a low, humming half-glow. "See?" Tyler said, voice steadier than I felt. "We're fine." The speaker above our heads popped once, a hot solder sound. Static breathed into the hall, and then the intercom did something it had never done. It whispered. It wasn't the principal's voice. It wasn't even a voice you could pin down as male or female. It sounded like breath moving through teeth, like words dragged across the bottom of a lake. Roll. Call. Every locker along the corridor clicked at once. Not open, not shut. Just that thin metallic tink a latch makes when it shifts. Then came another sound, lower, closer, a wheel squeaking. We turned as one. The janitor's cart by the trophy case had moved 6 inches. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, it rolled forward. Not smooth, not free, dragged. The mop handle scraped the wall with a peeling sound, leaving a chalky line. "Keegan?" Mia said, but it came out as a plea. The intercom cleared its throat. A new sound bled through, the rustle of paper. When the voice spoke again, it wasn't words, not at first. It was a list, names, read as though from a ledger. "What? Whitmore, Sarah," it said, stumbling over the first syllable and then smoothing into a rhythm. "Carpenter Ruth, child, unknown, infant, unknown, veteran, unknown, 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 unknown." I didn't realize I was moving until my shoulder brushed glass. The trophy case reflected us in fractured pieces. The 4 of us gathered under the sagging lanterns, pale and small. Behind our reflections, someone else stood. Tall, in a black suit. Dirt smeared up the cuffs as if he'd pushed himself out of the earth by the wrists. His face was the color of old paper, his mouth a narrow line that didn't quite hold. He lifted one hand, not to wave, to point. At me, time unhooked. For a moment, the hallway folded in on itself, like we were being walked backward through a long, narrow throat. The air smelled wrong, cut grass and lilies pressed flat inside a glove box, the sweetness going wet and sick. "Stop," I said, or thought I did. My lips were numb. The undertaker didn't blink. His finger lowered, slowly, until it hovered over the catch on the trophy case. The latch lifted with a sound like a small bone popping. The glass swung inward with a draft and a sigh. "Don't," Mia said, bursting to life. She flung the door shut. It bounced, latched, held. The lights went out again. This time there was no hum, no warming back. The emergency sign failed with a tired breath, and for a heartbeat we were blind. Then, like a bruise forming, the corridor filled with a light that had no source. Not bright, just enough to outline edges. It traced the seams in the tile. It drew a shape around the cart. It gathered like fog at the base of the wall where a strip of molding had come loose. The molding peeled back. "What the?" Tyler began. Behind it, hidden in a shallow gap, was a narrow door. Not a proper door, more like a thumb-long cut in the sheetrock with a metal edge, old and orange with rust. The sort of thing you never see unless you know where to look. The cut gaped. Cold breathed out. The intercom clicked. 2 delicate chimes sounded. The same 2-note tone that usually meant the principal had an announcement. Then, in a voice that wasn't a voice, the school spoke to us. Down. Absolutely not, Mia said. Nope, hard pass. Ms. Alvarez, I yelled. We need you. The gym doors swung open. Ms. Alvarez stood framed against the dark, a flashlight in her hand. For a moment, I thought everything was going to be okay. An adult, a normal thing, someone to fix the broken. Then her light slid across the floor and caught our faces. I saw exactly what she saw. 4 kids, white with fear, a janitor's cart with its mop at attention, a seam in the wall we'd never noticed, a draft strong enough to stir the paper fringe of our lanterns. Her mouth thinned. She stepped forward. Stay behind me. She put her fingers into the cut, found purchase, and pulled. The panel creaked and swung out. Behind it, a cavity yawned, just large enough to accept the idea of a stairwell. Cold rose up in a thin, endless column. Generators out, she said. I think these might be maintenance stairs. Jace, you've been in the theater tunnels, right? Those are under the auditorium, he said, voice tight. This isn't mapped. Not now, Mia breathed. Please. Stay, Ms. Alvarez said. I'll check 2 steps down. She lifted the flashlight, pressed her shoulder through, and vanished into the space. We waited. The seconds pulled long, each one a drop of water drawing out a wire. Ms. Alvarez, I called. Her light flicked once in the hole, then again. Then, nothing. Ms. A? Tyler tried. He glanced at me. We can't just... We couldn't. So we didn't. We moved. The first step was a slab of poured concrete that felt damp through my sneakers. The second was the same, and the third, and the fourth, until counting steps felt like counting sins, and the cool on my cheeks became a thin film. The air tasted metallic, like water poured from a rusted spigot. Ms. Alvarez, Mia whispered. Please answer. The flashlight beam bounced off a low ceiling, and then off a curve of wall that was too close and too wet. We weren't in a stairwell anymore. We were under the school. The space opened into a corridor, narrow and arched. The brick wasn't brick. It was earth packed and shaped, held in place by timbers gone black with damp. Water ticked somewhere, regular as a clock. The light picked out something white in the mud, a shard long and smooth as a whittled stick. Bone, Jace said quietly, and then clapped a hand over his mouth like he could stuff the word back in. We found her flashlight before we found her. It lay on its side in a drift of silt, casting a beam across a series of marks gouged into the wall. Names, scratched with something sharp. Sarah Whitmore, Ruth Carpenter, infant unknown. 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 A smear of something darker ran through the list and into the earth. Not wet, not new, just old, like the ghost of a bruise. Mia set 2 fingers against the names. They wrote themselves here, she whispered. Or someone did it for them. Ledger, I said before I could stop myself. The intercom upstairs. The list. Mr. Hargrove's gravel voice. When you move the living, they complain. When you move the dead, they haunt. A breath passed through the corridor. Not air, breath. The lantern light above us dimmed, brightened, dimmed again. We all looked up at the same time and saw them. Not bodies, not faces you could photograph, just the knowledge of people, an accumulation of human presence pressed into the cold and drawn up like a print. The space around us thickened with it. Women in long dresses that the earth had kept the shape of. Men in suits from a time when men wore suits to everything, even their own grief. Children, small and serious. The undertaker stood among them. He looked more solid than the rest, real enough that I could see the crease at the corner of his mouth where other mouths had once pressed prayers. He didn't lift his hand to point this time. He lifted it to count. 1 finger, 2, 3. He pressed the 3 fingers to his chest. When he moved them away, they left a mark, as if he'd touched ash to his vest. 3, Jace said. 3 what? Left behind, I said. The words came out of some place in me I didn't know I had. 3 that never moved, 3 that stayed. The undertaker inclined his head once, the smallest nod I've ever seen. Where's Ms. Alvarez? Mia's voice broke on the last word. The undertaker turned. The corridor opened a throat we hadn't noticed and offered a room. Not a room. An impression of space, square, low, walls smoothed by hands. At its center lay a shape not quite coffin and not quite box. The idea of a container. The place where a body had been and then not been and still was. Something else lay on top of it. A book swelled with rot, its spine split, its pages blooming. And though there was no air down there to turn them, the pages turned. The undertaker didn't touch the book. He looked at me. You want me to read it? I said. He didn't nod this time. He didn't have to. I stepped forward. The mud grabbed at my shoes. Every cell in my body screamed to run, to claw meaning out of flight. But there was a gravity to the place that shut down childish choices. I put my fingers to the pages. The ink had migrated into the paper in a way ink does when it has too many decades to make up its mind. But the words were still there. Not full sentences. Columns, name, date, plot, note. Most of the notes said moved, followed by an address and a date from 1954. Some of the notes said no marker. A few said unknown. 3 had no note at all. Sarah Whitmore, Ruth Carpenter, infant boy, unnamed. Say them, Mia whispered. I did. I said each name like it was a prayer. The way my grandmother says names in church when someone lights a candle. With each name, the corridor changed temperature. So slight you couldn't accuse it of changing, and yet you felt it. A pressure lifted from the space the way grave dirt slumps after rain. A sound answered from somewhere behind us. Not a voice. The sound a lock makes when it has been asked the same question too many times and finally decides to be merciful. Ms. Alvarez? Tyler called. Her light moved first. Then she did. Around a bend that hadn't been there, face washed hoof-white by the beam. She wasn't hurt. She wasn't even particularly dirty. Just gone long enough to remake us without her. I thought I heard students, she said, voice steady. Then my light died, and the path, I don't know. I don't know how I ended up here. Let's go, Mia said. Please. We left the room as we'd found it. We didn't close anything. We didn't touch the panel in the wall. The undertaker watched us pass. As I reached him, he lifted his hand and for the first time touched me. Not my face, not my chest, my wrist. He pressed one cold finger against the skin where my pulse sat, counting the seconds of my life. It felt like a stamp. But when I looked later, there would be no mark. The feeling remains even now. A gentle pressure, like a reminder, like a tally. On the way up, the corridor bent the wrong ways. The stair climbed too many steps, and then not enough. We should have come out by the trophy case. We came up in the cafeteria storage instead, into a room that smelled of coffee filters and napkins and old cardboard. When we pushed the door, the hallway lay exactly as we'd left it, except for one thing. The janitor's cart was gone. The power returned in a single, arrogant breath. The overheads hummed. The lanterns blinked themselves alive. The intercom clicked and offered a cheerful, pre-recorded apology for the brief interruption in service. A voice that made me hate it for pretending. Ms. Alvarez stood for a long time under the nearest ceiling fixture, with her eyes closed, as if the light itself were a kind of heat you could absorb. "Go home," she said finally, and the way she said it made home sound like a holy word. "Now, I'll finish what's left." We didn't argue. We didn't ask about extra credit, or who would set out the cider tomorrow, or whether the paper bats were straight. We just gathered what was ours and left the building with our backs tight and the weight of the air on our shoulders. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves ran across the parking lot like animals with small, desperate feet. The clouds hung so low I felt I could reach up and tear a piece off like cotton. "Tell me that happened," Tyler said, climbing into his mom's minivan. "It happened," Mia said, buckling in. Her voice surprised me. It wasn't high or shaken. It sounded like a decision. Jace didn't say anything. He looked at the school the way people look at a house that has just finished burning. I waited until everyone else had driven away, and then I climbed into my own car. My hands shook so hard on the wheel, I had to sit there for a full minute. When I turned the key, the radio was already on. It shouldn't have been. I always turned it off before I got out. But it was. Static for a second, and then a voice. Not the intercom, not the undertaker, my grandmother. "Names matter," she said, the way she does when she thinks I'm not listening. "Names are the bridge." The static returned and ate her. The dial on the radio spun by itself to a station that didn't exist. For a moment, I thought I heard church music, thin and tin bright, the kind they play on an organ that hasn't been tuned in 40 years. I put the car in drive. At the edge of the lot, I stopped and looked back. The second-floor hallway windows glowed, a row of squares of pale light. In the third window from the left, framed perfectly in the center, a tall figure stood and watched me leave. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't need to. At home, I ran water that never seemed to warm my fingers. I scrubbed my wrist where he'd touched me until the skin flushed and the bones stood out sharp and narrow. No mark, no proof. Just that feeling. A finger resting. Not unkind, not kind. A dot of pressure in the ledger. I didn't sleep. When I did drift, I dreamed I was in the corridor again, and the names on the wall wouldn't stay still. They slid around and traded places, and every time I tried to say one out loud, the undertaker shook his head. No. In the dream, I wasn't afraid. I was embarrassed, the way you are when you forget someone's name at a funeral. At 3:07 a.m., someone knocked on my window. Not loud. 3 taps spaced exactly far apart enough to be a message. I didn't look. The glass told me everything I needed to know. It turned cold in a circle the size of a fingertip, then another, then another. 3 small coins of winter pressed against summer skin. By morning, I understood something I hadn't understood before the stairs, before the catalog, before the names. The dead hadn't come up to scare us. They'd come up to be counted. And the undertaker? He wasn't pointing to curse me. He was pointing because I had seen, because I had said the names, and the room had eased, and the lock that wasn't a lock had sighed. He was pointing because he had work left to do, and somehow, impossibly, he decided I was part of it. I told myself I didn't believe that I drank too much cafeteria cider and breathed too many fumes off paint and tape. I told myself I believed nothing. And still, all day, every reflective surface I passed, windows, the chrome arm of the drinking fountain, the blank black screen of my phone, showed me my face, and standing slightly behind my left shoulder, a man in a suit whose sleeves would never come clean. The festival was that night. The parents would come. The gym would glow. The kids would laugh and pluck cupcakes off a table and fall in love under cheap orange lanterns. The school would pretend to be a place where nothing bad had ever happened. We would all pretend with it. But under the feet of the living, the ledger waited, and in its swollen pages 3 lines still did not have a note. Sarah Whitmore, Ruth Carpenter, infant, unnamed. The bridge had been named. The crossing had only started. The fall festival looked like a promise we didn't deserve. By 6 o'clock, the parking lot was full. Trucks with hay still stuck in their wheel wells, minivans with paper pumpkins taped to the back windows. The band warmed up in the bleachers, brass testing bright scales that never seemed to resolve. The gym smelled like cinnamon and floor wax and warm bodies. Orange lanterns trembled along the rafters like second moons. Parents took photos by the balloon arch. Little kids darted under the rope line and got scolded, and then handed cupcakes anyway. For a minute, if you squinted just right, the whole town looked like it had never done anything wrong. I stood with my back against the wall by the water fountain and watched it all move, a curtain breathing in and out. Tyler pressed a paper cup into my hand. "Cider," he said. "I tested it for ectoplasm." "Thanks," I said, not drinking. "How's your wrist?" He flexed it. "Still attached. Yours?" Where the undertaker had touched me, the skin felt normal. It also felt like a doorbell that remembered being pressed. Mia joined us with a camera strap across her chest, hair braided tight. Jace followed, carrying a coil of gaffer's tape like a rosary. None of us said basement. None of us said book. We said other things that circled the thing we meant. "You see Ms. Alvarez?" Mia asked. "I want a quote for yearbook." "She's with the principal," Jace said. "He's mad the backup generator failed. Keeps saying it reflects poorly on operations." "Everything reflects poorly on operations," Tyler said, "including ghosts." A guitar fumbled its way into tune. Streamers rippled in a draft that shouldn't have existed. The far set of doors opened, and a late-arriving family hustled in. Mom, Dad, 2 kids. The smaller one paused on the threshold and stared down the long hallway toward the cafeteria. "Come on," the dad said, gently tugging. The kid didn't move. He lifted one hand like he was counting, then pressed his fingers to his chest and whispered something I couldn't hear. The dad scooped him up, and they disappeared into the noise. "Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" Mia said. Before I could answer, a hand landed on my shoulder. I turned, ready to deflect a teacher's "don't loiter" speech, and found my grandmother. She wore her church coat buttoned all the way to the throat, though the air in the gym was thick enough to swim. "How did you—" I started. "Your mother asked me to drop off pies," she said. "I brought more than pies." She pressed my wrist with dry fingers, the exact spot the undertaker had marked. "You've been chosen to remember." I didn't volunteer. "No one does," she said. "They ask the ones who look back." Mia glanced between us. "Ma'am, with respect, what do we do? Because last night..." "Names are bridges," my grandmother said, "and bridges are for crossing in both directions. But the living have to decide which way the traffic goes." She looked at me. "Have you decided?" I didn't know there was a decision. I also knew I'd already made it. 3, I said. "There are 3 without notes." Her eyes softened. "There are always more than 3. But tonight, you can carry 3. "Do we dig?" Tyler asked, and even saying the word in a gym full of folding chairs felt wrong. "No," she said sharply. "We do not make more wounds." She turned to me again. "We speak, we witness. We give the town the choice to be decent." "And if it chooses not to be?" I asked. She looked up at the rafters where the lanterns swung like patient clocks. "Then the dead will continue to make their case." The first game of the night, a cakewalk, started near the stage. Somebody's uncle tried to get the microphone to work and failed and made a joke about technology. The speakers coughed and offered feedback like a sting. Laughter fluttered, relieved and reflexive. My grandmother slid a folded sheet of paper into my palm. On it, she'd written 3 names in a looping hand, steadier than I'd seen in years. Sarah Whitmore, Ruth Carpenter, infant, unnamed. "Say them out loud," she told me, "where everyone can hear. Now, before the music drowns you out." It's one thing to whisper names in a wet tunnel with the world narrowed to a cone of light. It's another to say them in a room full of people who still believe themselves safe. My mouth went dry. Tyler squeezed my shoulder. Mia nodded once. Jace, who looked like sleep had avoided him all day, flexed his fingers on the roll of tape. I walked toward the stage. The principal intercepted me halfway there, smiling the way men who practice smiling smile. "Enjoying yourselves?" he said. His tie was harvest orange. His eyes glossed past me, tallying the cupcake table, the raffle jars, the attendance. "Sir," I said, holding up the paper, "I need the microphone." "Ha," he said, already turning. "Not tonight, champ. We're on program." "It's important," I said. "It's about the school." He stopped smiling. Exactly why not tonight? Beyond him, a freshman missed a beanbag toss and whooped. The marching band trombone section launched into something ambitious and fell apart on bar 3. 2 dads argued good-naturedly about the best way to keep a hot plate hot. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," I said. "I'm trying to stop it." The principal's jaw whitened. "Whatever rumor you think you've confirmed, you will not air it here. We have donors present, board members. If you want to discuss building operations, you make an appointment." "They're not rumors," I said. "They're people." "Enough," he snapped, and for a second, the man under the tie showed. A brittle thing, all edge and old, dry fear. "Go enjoy yourself." He stepped around me and walked to the line at the cider urn. Tyler let out a breath between his teeth. Subtlety failed. "Plan B?" Mia asked. "Make our own microphone," Jace said. He pointed up. "Fire alarm. People will look. Then you speak." "Do not pull the alarm," my grandmother said at my elbow, which is how I learned that a person can materialize without ghosts. "We do not lie to get to the truth." She looked at the stage. "But you can borrow the truth that's already been made." Chairs scraped. Ms. Alvarez stepped up to the lectern and tapped it gently. A volunteer had gotten the PA to work. Her voice rolled out velvet smooth. "Thank you all for coming. Before we start the costume parade, we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge, well, what this building means for our students, for our town." She was going to talk about progress, about community. She'd say all the right words and mean them, because Ms. Alvarez only did things she meant. The problem wasn't her words. It was the foundation they balanced on. "Now," she said, "I'm going to invite me," I said, and was moving before I knew I'd moved. I think they let me pass because I looked like a kid on a mission, or because the gym recognized the shape of what was about to happen the way a field recognizes weather. Ms. Alvarez didn't step aside so much as adjust the angle of her body by the width of a coin. I stood at the lectern, and the microphones made my bones feel amplified. "Sorry," I started. "I'll be quick." The room set its weight. I could feel where the principal stood by the cider urn without looking. I could feel the room's temperature, the on-deck inhale of 300 people gathered to be entertained. I could feel the undertaker too, at my left shoulder. Not a presence exactly, more a rightness occupying a space. "This is a celebration," I said, "and I love that. This school deserves to be celebrated, but part of what a place deserves is the truth of what it stands on." The principal began to move. Ms. Alvarez's hand, light as a page, touched my back. "Before the shopping plaza that never got built," I said. "Before the old parking lot. Before any of that. This ground was a cemetery. Some of the graves were moved. Some were not. That's not rumor. That's what happened." The gym didn't gasp. It stiffened. The way you do when a joke takes a turn, and your body has to decide whether you're allowed to laugh. "3 people we know stayed," I said, and my grandmother's paper felt like it weighed a pound. 3 who did not get their names carried. I'm going to say their names out loud so they can cross, and so we can too. The intercom hummed, soft, warning, like a throat clearing. The principal had reached the base of the stage. Ms. Alvarez glanced down at him, and the look she gave him was a private conversation, the kind adults have when they decide which child gets to go first. He stopped. I read. The lights didn't flicker. The speakers didn't spit. Nothing cinematic happened. A paper lantern near the center of the rafters turned on its wire a half rotation and settled. Somewhere behind the bleachers, a baby made a small, satisfied sound and went back to sleep. Then the floor breathed. It was tiny, less than the correction a building makes when a gust hits, but it had intention. Over near the trophy case, the janitor's cart we'd lost last night squeaked around the corner and rolled itself to a neat stop by the wall. The mop rested against the handle, squared and straight. A father in a long-sleeve tee with a seed company logo walked to the cart and laid 2 fingers on the handle like a pulse taker. He stood there a long time with his head bent. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. My granddad talked about the move. He said to no one in particular. Said it wasn't right. He was on the crew. Said, his voice broke. He swallowed. Said the ground would keep the deed until someone signed it proper. Across the gym, a woman in scrubs said, Sarah Whitmore was my great-aunt. My grandmother told me not to visit her grave because there wasn't one left to visit. She looked at me. Thank you for saying her. The principal reached the microphone and turned it off. He didn't take it from me. He didn't have to. The gym had already changed the channel. The conversation hopped, then raced. then settled into a low, dangerous hum that carried under the music and the laughter and made a new, honest thing. "Enjoy the festival," he said. "Too cheerful, too brittle. We appreciate everyone respecting tonight's focus on community." People did enjoy it. They also looked at the floor as they walked. They stepped a little lighter. A trio of old men conferred like a county commission on a porch. I caught the words, "memorial," "proper marker," "contractor with a ground-penetrating radar," and we could at least ask. The undertaker didn't appear, but the feeling in the room had his handwriting. Neat, spare, final. "Come on," Tyler said softly. "We're not finished." We slipped out the side door into the colder air. The sky had settled into a lid of cloud. The parking lot lights smeared a dull glow across windshields. The cottonwoods out by the creek made their dry hands sound. Mia led us along the service path past the cafeteria and into the shade behind the building where the grass grew high. We found the stones again. 3 we knew, a handful we didn't. The one we could read still read the same. Sarah Whitmore, beloved daughter, 1879 to 1894. Someone, recently, had cleared away the weeds from around it, exposing a shallow ellipse in the earth around the base, as if the ground remembered the curve of a body and had kept the shape out of habit. "I brought these," Mia said, pulling 3 small jars from her bag, votive candles and cloudy glass. No crosses, no rituals, just light. "You think light helps?" Jace asked. "I think being seen helps," she said, and set them down. We didn't pray. We didn't ask for anything. We said the names again because my grandmother had told me names are bridges, and because the bridge felt steadier every time you crossed. We told Sarah about the band's new uniforms and how orange wasn't anyone's favorite, but we wore it anyway. We told Ruth Carpenter the cafeteria had finally fixed the lemonade dispenser so it didn't spit syrup. We told the unnamed infant that the PTA had put up a changing table in the restroom closest to the gym and that the lock worked, which felt like the right kind of kindness to mention. The wind moved around us, curious but not unkind. Somewhere above, the intercom clicked, a whale song coming from a dry building. The gym music reached us in softened phrases. Somebody started Monster Mash, and the bass thumped like a good joke about a bad heart. "Do you hear that?" Tyler asked after a minute. "Under the music?" At first, I didn't. Then I did. The thin, tinny sound of an organ played by someone who didn't care if it was in tune. Church, from a long time ago. It wasn't coming from the gym. It was coming from the ground. "Okay," Jace said, failing to sound blasé. "That's new." "It's old," I said. We stood there until our ears stopped inventing meanings for the wind. When we turned back toward the building, I felt a difference in my stride, as if the ground had flattened by a fraction of an inch under my weight. It was the smallest gift, permission to put your foot down. Inside, the festival wrapped itself around new facts. When the raffle numbers were called, a white-haired woman asked if the prize money could be donated toward a proper marker. The principal said they'd have to check policy, and 6 other people said they'd donate anyway. Ms. Alvarez wove between them all, making the kind of notes teachers make when they witness the hour a lesson lands in a body. Not everything shifted. A senior boy rolled his eyes and mimed playing the world's smallest violin. 2 freshmen filmed a TikTok under a paper bat, clucking at the drama. One stubborn father said, "Hysteria," and "kids these days," and "I know what I know," and his wife took their daughter's hand and walked her to cupcake table and picked the one with the white frosting and the little sugar lily on top. By 9, the gym had thinned to a last circle of helpers. We stacked chairs and rolled tables and tried to make the place forget it had been asked to be honest. My grandmother hugged me long and hard and left without another word. The principal thanked us for our tireless spirit. Ms. Alvarez handed out trash bags like communion wafers. When we hauled the last bag out to the dumpster, the service hallway exhaled cold. The panel in the wall, the one the molding had hidden, was shut and latched. A strip of new paint, careful and flat, covered the seam. "Facilities works fast," Tyler said. Jace pressed his ear to the wall and listened. "It echoes wrong," he said. Mia snapped a photo. "For records," she said, "in case policy forgets." We didn't go back down. We didn't need to. The job down there wasn't pulling and pushing and moving dirt. It was the slower, stranger work of telling the truth out loud until the truth became a habit. The kind of work towns resist until they don't. I went home under a sky that didn't show me stars and didn't promise me rain. My mother had left a lamp on in the living room and a note on the counter. "Back soon. Grandma says you did fine." I washed my hands and watched the water bead on my wrist where the undertaker had touched me and do something water doesn't do. It split around an invisible shape and rejoined below, like flowing around a button sewn under the skin. I didn't sleep right away. When I finally drifted, I woke to the sound of someone walking down my hallway. Not the careful steps of a parent, the measured pace of someone counting. 1, 2, 3. I sat up. The steps stopped outside my bedroom door. "Come in," I said before I could be afraid. The doorknob didn't turn. The air in the room changed temperature by 1/2 degree. The mirror on my dresser fogged, not with breath, with intention. 3 circles bloomed in a row and faded, as if someone had pressed a fingertip pattern there and then withdrawn the hand. "Tomorrow," I said to the empty room. "I'll go to the superintendent. I'll bring the names and the clipping and the photo of the stones. We'll get ground radar. I stopped. Promises have to be sized to the world they fit. "We'll keep saying you," I said instead. "We'll keep saying you until the note gets written." Silence arranged itself in neat folds. From somewhere outside, a block away, or 5, or 100 years, I heard an organ give up on a hymn and land on a chord that wasn't right and was, for that reason, perfect. Morning found the town with a hangover made of honesty. At the diner, Mr. Hargrove let me pay for his coffee and didn't protest when I set the clipping down and asked him to initial the margin. At school, a history teacher slipped me a photocopy of a map that shouldn't have survived a file purge and had. A board member cornered the principal by the trophy case and kept his voice low and his finger higher. By afternoon, a rumor, not the bad kind, said there might be a vote. By evening, the PTA posted a note on the school website that used names like stakes in the ground. None of that is an ending. A week later, when the wind came up hard out of the west and knocked the trash cans down like a row of drums, the intercom in my bedroom clicked on by itself. A voice like a page being turned said, "Roll, call," and then only static. When I lifted the window for fresh air, the glass breathed cold against my hand in 3 small coins. At school, 2 freshmen swore they'd seen a man in a suit step into a classroom and then not be there when they opened the door. The janitor's cart stayed by the trophy case for 3 days, and then vanished, and then appeared again, polished like someone had taken pride. Sometimes, when I walk past the back lawn where the grass grows wrong, I feel a soft pressure at my wrist, a tally mark that isn't ink. Some days I can ignore it, some days I can't. The bridge will always be there because the names are always there. All we can do is keep the traffic moving in the right direction. You want an ending? You want me to tell you the town voted to move the 3? Or that the ground-penetrating radar found so many shapes we had to invent a new word for sorrow? You want me to say we built a memorial, and that every fall, on the night of the festival, we put lilies where lilies belong? Some of those things will happen, some won't. I can't give you all of it. I can only give you what I have. Last night, I walked the second-floor hallway after tutoring. The building was mostly empty. The shadows were doing their old job. I stopped in front of the trophy case because that's where I stop now. Sarah Whitmore, I said softly. Ruth Carpenter, little one. The glass bloomed in 3 small circles, one after the other, as if someone on the other side had pressed a fingertip through fog. Then the circles faded. The lights didn't flicker. The lockers didn't click. Nothing dramatic, just a feeling, like a ledger adding a gentle note in the margin. Scene. At the far end of the corridor, the undertaker stood. He didn't point. He touched his own wrist, 2 fingers finding a pulse. Then he lifted his hand in the smallest gesture that could still be called a blessing, and the hallway felt less like a throat and more like a passage. I blinked, and he was gone. On my way out, I passed the principal and Ms. Alvarez in conversation. He was talking policy, budget, liability. She was talking names. I don't know who will win. Maybe that isn't even the right verb. At home, the radio came on when I turned the key and landed on a station the dial doesn't have. My grandmother's voice slid through 2 counties of static. Do the next right thing, then the next. The music that followed was a hymn with the words missing. I sang along anyway. If you're waiting for the part where the dead stop knocking, don't. They earned the knocking. If you're waiting for the part where I stop listening, don't wait for that either. Most nights, it's quiet. Some nights, it isn't. On those nights, I get up, open the window, and place 3 fingertips against the glass, exactly where the cold will bloom. Then I say what I know. Names are bridges. Bridges carry weight. Tonight, I can carry 3. Tomorrow, maybe I can carry more.